Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do those things more responsibly. Today, I have a conversation with my friend Austinn. Austinn was one of my best friends growing up. We went to the same church for a long time, traveled in the same friend group when we were in high school and through college, and he's always been a fun and interesting person to talk to, and he's always got something fun up his sleeve. I asked him to come on to the podcast because I had seen him start posting all of these questions on Facebook. Some of them more lighthearted, but some of them deeper and more serious about religion or philosophy or whatever. And so I was interested in knowing why he was doing it. And then I asked him to bring a question to discuss. So we did that for a long time, and it was really enjoyable. So I will let you get to the conversation. Austinn Hallman.
Cassidy.
Thank you for coming to my house and doing my podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's been a minute, huh?
It has, yeah.
Well, okay, so before we get rolling, why don't you just give the people a little introduction on who you are, whatever you feel like they should know.
Sounds good. So my name's Austinn Hallman. I was born and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a follower of Jesus. I serve at my church, North Bible Church, in the youth group. I've been doing that for several years now. I also work for a legal nonprofit organization. I'm a husband to my wife, Julia, and we have a daughter on the way due in a couple weeks. So, yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting you're about to be a dad. That's
I know,
so weird to me.
It's exciting.
It is exciting.
It is different.
Are you nervous?
Not really. I'm nervous for the birth, but
Well, Julia should be
beyond
more
that,
nervous for the birth.
She is.
Well, great. So I asked you to come here because you've been doing something on Facebook that I found interesting. So explain it. What have you been doing?
Sure. So a little backstory. Last year, 2020, COVID hit, and then there were a lot of racial tension going on, a lot of just bad news, just a lot of negativity going around. In general, a lot of issues being brought up and being dealt with, which is good. It's kind of part of why, like John Krasinski did some good news thing. It's kind of to lighten the mood, and so I posted a question on Facebook, which was, what's something encouraging that you've seen lately? And that was I just posted that as a question on Facebook, and I got some responses, and I don't even really remember. And then I just started posting questions like that, and then questions about different things, fun things, deep things, religious things. So I did that for a while. I have been doing that since, not in any regular cadence at all, or with any rhyme or reason really, but just been asking questions on Facebook and seeing what kind of responses we get.
So why Facebook? I mean, I feel like it's a pretty divisive place. Why Facebook to ask some of these questions? And like you said, there's a range. Some of them are lighthearted, but then some of them are, pretty divisive questions.
Yeah. Honestly, I think I used Facebook just because is a platform that I've used for so long. I didn't feel like Instagram because Facebook and Instagram are the only social media I really have. I didn't want to post something on Instagram. I don't check it as much, and it didn't feel like the place for it. I know it's mostly photos and stuff, so I just decided to post on Facebook because I have Facebook and I post sometimes. There really wasn't any
rhyme or
thought
reason,
out. Just went for it.
Okay, so what's the experience been as you're starting to get responses to these questions? Do you always get responses to your questions? And if so, or if not, how does that feel, and what's sort of the engagement you're seeing through those?
Yeah, so it's been mixed. There are questions that I won't get responses to. There are questions that I get several responses to. I'm not big on Facebook. I'm not a personality or anything, so it's just my friends, usually a small group of my friends who see it and comment, if anybody comments. And so I have no expectations for it. It's kind of there's been some really deeper questions or bigger questions that I've posted, and it got no responses. And I don't know what part of that is just like the Facebook algorithm, people didn't see it or whatnot, and what part of it's just people didn't want to answer. But so that's like kind of disappointing in a way, but I just like, again, I have no expectations, so it's whatever it is. Usually the more fun, lighthearted questions or questions about The Office get more responses because they're easier to like answer, and you're not jumping into a conversation where there could be debate or anything like that. So it's more accessible for people.
Right. So which are your favorite questions to ask? The fun ones or the hard ones?
I really like the like Christian worldview questions, just because that's like what I'm into, I guess you could say. But obviously, like questions about The Office, because they get a lot of interaction. I love those questions, and I'm such a huge fan of The Office. So,
yeah. So, the Christian theology questions. Mm-hmm. Where's that coming from? Why do you have that sort of interest in searching those questions?
Yeah, good question.
I love it when I ask a question.
Me too. So I've always, I grew up in a Christian home, so I was raised with the Christian faith around me. Became a Christian at a young age, and I really began to take my faith more seriously. Gradually, but like through high school and whatnot, but like very seriously, probably 3-4 years ago, about the year, like a year before I met my wife, and being in a relationship with my wife and getting married, like all compelled me to become more spiritually mature. So with that, I have studied more of the Christian faith and gotten into apologetics and different things, and just wanting to know why I believe what I believe, and the backbone of it, and being able to share my faith with others. This pastor in California who has his own ministry called Bible Thinker, Mike Winger is his name. I stumbled across one of his videos on YouTube. Am now like one of his biggest fans. All his content is really good. It's very much logical thinking about the Bible and what we believe. It's super Bible focused, so he does verse by verse teachings, and he gets into what things mean and why. So with all those things combined, I have gotten into faith more and into apologetics more. Not that I'm an expert, but it's just something I'm more and more passionate about as time goes by.
Yeah, that's great. So in the spirit of what you're doing, I asked you to come here and bring one of your questions that you either put on Facebook or wanted to ask, and I know what it is, but share with everybody. What do you want to talk about? Yeah,
so this question is one that you responded to on Facebook, and kind of started a conversation between us. But the question is, why do people who were raised in the church leave the church? That's the question.
I forgot I responded to that on Facebook.
Yeah, I remember.
I remember now. I'm like, oh wait, I did respond to that.
So you responded to it, and then it led to a conversation between us, and then you met with Julia and I. Not to talk maybe specifically about that, but just to talk about faith stuff.
So why to you is that question important?
I think it's important because it's such to the Christian, it's such an issue. As someone who is passionate about who Christ is and what I believe about him and what he means to me and to the world, and the truth that's in there, it's important for people to know that, and that includes the youth and includes young people. And so as a Christian, I want to teach young Christians, especially someone who serves in the youth group, that's a passion of mine. I want to teach young people what their faith is, why they should believe it, why they believe it, how to act it out. As a father, I want to teach my daughter Penelope to what our faith is and why it's true and why it's important, and to raise her in that. And so when you see people who are raised with what I consider to be the truth, with Christianity, with faith in Jesus, when you see those people leaving, it reveals something that was missing or something that wasn't there. It's a shame, because obviously someone who really loves their faith and loves Jesus wouldn't leave that necessarily. So,
well, yeah, and I think as Christians, you don't want to see people leave either, because
right.
if you believe it's true, there's something that there's a piece of that which you're I don't know if it's a fear, but just like an acknowledgement that by leaving, someone might be walking into a path that might not be as healthy, or So I mean,
definitely. I think that's something that any faith or any even group can relate to, is not wanting their people to
leave,
to abandon them or leave or lose out on what they have going.
Yeah. So why do you think people are leaving? I mean,
that's the question.
we grew up in the same church.
We did, yeah.
Yeah. And you're still a part of that church, and I'm not, in a kind of a big way.
Sure.
And I'm not a non-Christian, but it's different.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that the question would be specifically leaving the faith in general. Like, obviously, people can move from church to church,
right.
In terms of a local body of believers or a local gathering. But yeah, leaving the church, leaving the faith. I think, if you're asking me why I think people leave the faith, then I would say it's either it's a mix of things. I think the biggest thing is kids that are raised Christian are given a very surface level teaching of the Bible and of Christianity and of Jesus. I think that they lack the understanding of I guess like what apologetics teaches, like why we actually believe what we believe, why the Bible is true, why it's trustworthy. So I think that's part of it, a lack of apologetics, a lack of the why behind believing. I think it's easy for the church to just be complacent about that. It's like, here's what you should believe, and they think that that's enough. Because when kids grow up and leave the home, they see that there's other things that they could believe, and so they explore those things. And if they don't understand why they believed something, they might even resent that they were taught that and nothing else.
Yeah.
So I think that's one big side of it. I think the other side would be an issue of, and I want to be careful how I say this, but basically, if you're not rooted in your faith, then it's just something that you're part of. And then when you have an opportunity to go after things that you might find more appealing or pleasurable, or if there's a kind of a sinful issue, like if you struggle with a sin that Christianity doesn't accept, then you will reject your faith for that sin or for that thing. So kind of a selfish reason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely with you. I think there's a lot of this, and I say it often, where, the churches teach us what to believe, but there's not a real acknowledgement of why we believe what we believe. And I think there is a big problem with that. And I mean, I think apologetics is great. I have such a love-hate relationship with that, because it was very helpful for me as I sort of deconstructed and rethought and tried to think about what I was believing. But I also feel like there's this sort of hyper-reliance on reason, where it becomes a sort of Tower of Babel building to God, right? Where we're like taking all of these ideas and then we're building God in the way that we see him, or, the thing that we can rationalize. And I think the thing about God is, like, he can't be fully rationalized. There's like a mystery to him. And if we could, like, he wouldn't be worth worshiping, right? And then there's also that, emotional side of, and I don't think it's just like, oh, I want to do this thing and it's against it, so I'm leaving. But I also think there's a part where it's like, when you start to realize that some of the things that you're taught or the way you believe in God isn't totally true, or at least you perceive that, it starts to become like to totally unravel things. And then people people start to really just throw everything out. And I think a lot of that has to do with the individual processing of those things. I've listened to a lot of deconstruction stories, and even with myself, I found that a lot of people don't feel like they can ask the questions in church bodies, and you know, the freedom, definitely. Like they can ask to a point, but then there's certain questions that, you know, get too questioning. And so then there's like not that space where they can work through that. And, you know, I think we're all better in, you know, a community and a group, like the more minds we have, and to take all of that time processing by yourself, I think it leaves the opportunity to really lose any confidence in the thing that you once hold.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an issue with not just the way that, say, the Bible is taught, but the lack of acceptance of doubt or questioning, that would somehow be like unacceptable, or again, kind of shoving down the throats that like this is what you believe and you have to believe that, and there's really no other way. And I do believe that Christianity is true and there isn't another way necessarily, but there's room for wondering, and I think there are a lot of things that are taught in different churches at different times that aren't true or are misinterpretations of the Bible. So you have to make room for, you know, humbling yourself and realizing that my church might not have it totally right, or I might not have it totally right.
Right.
I definitely don't have it totally right. Or my parents who taught me certain things, they might be off on certain things.
Right.
And so there's got to be a humility in that. And like you said, there are mysteries of God. Like it can't all be explained perfectly. There's miracles. There's even paradoxes in a way.
Yeah.
So there's room for the mystery. There needs to be room for that mystery and trying to figure out what that means.
Right. And I think the big thing that I came to was sort of this deconstruction and people walking away from the faith. There's one side of that question where if it's wrong, then there's good to rejecting it, right? I mean, kind of depends on which worldview you're looking at. I think if you're an atheist, and not all atheists believe this, but sort of the way that I've seen atheism and where it goes logically, philosophically, there's no good or bad ideas at all. They're just things, you know? So to believe in a faith or not believe in a faith, you can't make that judgment call.
Right.
But, you know, saying, you know, if Mormonism is the true church, right, which they claim,
right,
it would be good to reject Christianity and, you know, convert to Mormonism if it's the true church.
Right.
There's that question, though. How do we know it's true? And I think that a lot of times becomes a real hard question for people to answer, especially who grew up sort of in our generation.
Yeah, I think, you know, as a Christ follower, I don't totally understand what most other religions believe, but knowing my own religion and the studying that I've done over the last few years especially has brought me to a place where, in terms of my own testimony, like what I've experienced with God and how he's impacted my life and the lives of people around me, as well as what the Bible teaches, how that fits in with what I see in the world. And just the evidence that's there for who Christ was and who Jesus was, I should say. Christ is a title for Jesus. Don't want to get people confused if they're not super familiar, but who Jesus is and his death and resurrection being true events, historical events. Like if those are true, which I believe the evidence is there for that, then I'm confident in what I believe is true. So yeah, obviously. Everybody believes that they're right and what they think is true, because otherwise they wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So it's hard to walk that line. But
yeah, I think it's so interesting, and I've done videos on this, but like this idea that with religion or with certain worldviews, like we're making claims, like objective claims about how the world is, and I think as much as we can look at some of these subjective claims that are made between religions and some of the similarities with them, there are distinct differences between these things, and they matter.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we work together to kind of work through those and get to a more true version? Because it's so funny. A lot of these religions, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Islam, they all have a amount of trust in Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
or an incorporation of Jesus, but who is their Jesus? And,
Right,
and
yeah.
How close is that to what the real Jesus was?
Mm-hmm.
Those are all really big questions. And I think, I think something that I saw, not that I was sheltered completely, but there was a bit of a sheltering of like, hey, we're just going to learn about, this religion, and, Mormons out there crazy. Well, we believe some crazy things. Like, what's the difference? And
Right.
some Mormons will say, oh no, we're Christians. And
Mm-hmm.
I think they're distinctly different religions.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you wrestle with those questions, especially you saying that you don't know much about other religions? That's
Mm-hmm.
something that I always questioned, and sort of what led me to sort of this deconstruction of, well, how can I say I'm right if I don't even know what anybody else believes, and like their argumentation on what they believe?
Yeah. And I know a little bit about some of the religions, like Mormonism, for example. I know a little bit of their theology, and I think the question that you asked of like, how do we know that taking the religions that speak of Jesus, like how do we know that our Jesus is the right Jesus?
Yeah.
I think that's important, and I think that the Bible teaches a certain Jesus that that other faiths don't accept or have corrupted, I guess I would
Sure.
say. And I would put Mormonism in that category of they don't have the same Jesus as we do. They've added things, or they've messed with what's in the Bible, which is the Bible as being the basis of what I believe being God's word. In that sense, I think going to the Bible and figuring out who the real Jesus is and what we can know about him is the first step. And in terms of other religions, I think it is helpful to know what other people believe. I think mostly to relate to them and
Mm-hmm.
to understand where they're coming from and why they are thinking the way that they do, why they act the way that they do.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a necessity to understand someone else's religion to know that you are right, if that makes sense, if you do have the evidence that you need.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense, and it's impossible. It's impossible to know everything about every religion.
Right.
Like, you, there's no way you can do it. I think for me, I got to a certain point where, as I'm looking through these religions, I got to a point where I had enough sort of unanswered questions where it's like, okay, I'm happy to re-examine this if someone gives me another piece of evidence, but for now I can just close the gate, because like the amount of mental gymnastics I'll have to do to believe these things.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you were to give a case for why your Jesus is more reliable than these other Jesuses, what would you say?
I would say solely on the fact that the Jesus that I believe in is based in the Bible. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect in all my theology, or that I maybe have some nuance that is not correct about Jesus. But generally, the Jesus that I believe in and the things about Jesus that I think are key to the faith are based in Scripture and can be backed up by evidence when it comes to like his death and resurrection. I think that that's key, and that's kind of where a lot of churches or people go wrong is adding certain traditions or certain things that they've been taught to their theology without it going through the lens of the Bible first.
So why would you say the Bible's an authority? Because I think for a lot of people, that's like, who cares what the Bible says?
Right.
Like,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're not a Christian, then you probably don't care what the Bible says to a degree. But I would say that what Jesus taught about the Bible, his scripture was the Old Testament that they had, and he affirmed what the Old Testament was. So there's part of it that the Old Testament that he has, which is the Old Testament that I have, is the same and is affirmed in that way. And then in terms of the New Testament, I believe it's all based on what Jesus did and what he taught. I think that I don't know all the history behind how the how the New Testament came together and what was decided. I know there were criteria on what books or what writings were included. Knowing the ones that are included and knowing a process of why they were included, I'm confident, and examining them against the Gospels, I'm confident that they do a good job of representing who Christ is and affirming his teachings.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because a lot of times for people who walk away from the church, there's a lot of people who credit reading their Bible to being the thing that, turned them away from God. And in one sense, I can understand if you've read through the Bible, there's some weird stuff and some uncomfortable stories. And I think there's often this sort of question of like, well, why is it reliable? And why do we affirm those things? And, I think you can look at the Book of Mormon and they say it's based on historical events of Jesus coming to America and, dealing with these indigenous tribes. And there's some question on how accurate that is, in my opinion, and in other people's opinion.
Yeah.
But like, I think for me, the best place to start, I think, especially instead of, I think in church you're assumed like this is the word of God. And my perception of the Gospels and the Bible and the place that they have changed as I adapted through Christianity and the different traditions. Not that I don't have a high respect for it, but it's just been a different view than, the sola scriptura version that I had as a Protestant. But I think for me when I started, it was like, I'm not assuming these things are like divinely inspired. I'm looking them as ancient documents like I would look at, the Iliad or,
right.
Some of these older documents. And I think through that and the discovery of that process and a lot of those things within them gave me more confidence in the Bible as a whole and understanding it in this religious tradition and the way that it came through the church and informed the church. But, you work in a youth group. Are there a lot of, and you've been in the church, since we were kids, have you seen a lot of people leaving? And are they asking questions or just dropping out without, having a conversation?
I think a lot of it happens not like in an instant. So when a young person, say a student who graduates high school, for example, when they graduate, they usually are either in a new place, or they might still live in their parents' house, but they're with a new group of people, so they find a new church or that kind of thing. So I think unless you stay at your same church and are part of the young adults group or college group, like that's one example I don't think happens a lot. For the others who they either find a new church or they take a break from the church that they grew up in just because of the busyness of college or finding a job or whatever it may be. I think that gives them an opportunity to take a step back and reflect on why they believe what they believe. Maybe, if their parents were making them go to church, then now they are making that decision for themselves. And I think given that decision, they have to examine, like, do I really want to continue in the faith? Do I care enough to make it a priority to go to church, to be a part of a local gathering? And I think with that break and with that opportunity to reconsider the lack of, like what I talked about before, the lack of good teaching or the opportunity to go a different way is what then, people choose. It's not like, I'm getting close to the end of high school, so I'm going to decide to leave. It's like, I graduated and now I'm kind of put in this position where I'm in a break period and I have to start making my own decisions and prioritizing things for myself. I think that's kind of when it happens. So I don't think I've had too many conversations with kids who, when they graduated from the youth group that that went off to college, but like we're still well, like still involved in the church in any way that I would have be able to have a conversation with them about them not wanting to be part of the church anymore or anything like that. So if that clarifies, I think it's a unique situation because people are usually uprooted a little bit when they graduate or when students leave or when you become an adult. So it's kind of like there's not an accountability from people that maybe were in their life.
Sure. Do you think that's it's a problem?
I think so. I mean, as I talk about it right now, I'm like, there should be some accountability. I think there's a healthy level of like that's a good thing for kids to have an opportunity to decide for themselves and what they want to do. I think a good church family that sees a kid raised up in the church, or even if they joined as like a junior or a senior, if they have a good church community that's doing them a service of like being in community with them and raising them up and teaching them, that hopefully that they would also be trying to hold them accountable to the faith, and or not even just like hold them accountable like making them be part of the faith, but just like being part of their life and asking them about their faith,
asking them the right
questions. So I think it should be done more, and it should be more cohesive. I think one issue with our current church culture in America is just the separation of groups. It's like you're in the high school or like once you leave the high school, then you kind of have to find a place in this church where it's like young adults all the way up to the oldest people, so you have like children's ministry, middle school, high school, and then the rest of the church. And so it's kind of a daunting place to try to fit in after you graduate high school sometimes, especially if there's not like a good small group system or young adult group.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think there is something with the Western view and adoption of Christianity and faith that is incredibly individualistic. And while I understand it to a point, there's also that sort of problem to that thing of like when everybody's an individual and working it on themselves, like it creates less of a community to where you can really work and wrestle through those questions of what does it mean to follow Jesus and how do we do that. And I also think another problem that I have sort of seen is this consumerism model that's snuck into the church where, we're selling Jesus. We're selling the lifestyle of what Jesus can give you and what he offers instead of going, well, here's Jesus, raw and, untamed. Wrestle with who he is and figure out whether you're going to count the cost, whether that sort of lifestyle and what he calls you to do is something that you can do and it's worth it. And there's a bit of a scariness to me where you've got, I mean, I look at myself. I grew up in the church and I was taught all of these beautiful things about Jesus. And I embraced it and I adopted it. And I think like you, when I was 18, 19, that was sort of when it became like true to me. Not that I didn't believe it before, but it became that thing where it was like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to live this out and who is Jesus really and how to ask that. And the more that I started digging, the more I realized, oh, this guy I was sold is not what lies in these pages. And like the systems that I'm working with, they don't seem to reflect the things that I'm seeing in the Bible. And how do I wrestle with that? How do I do that? And then asking more and more questions, it eventually led me to even sort of question the forms and question this sort of skepticism of tradition and the way that informs a faith and what is supposed to be in Christianity. And it's been very interesting, but I would say like that's why I'm always torn with deconstruction, because there's always a part of me that's like, you don't want to see people not say they believe in God or leave the faith, because I think those things are I think they're true, and I think they're so vital in having a healthy human relationship with yourself and with others. Yet there's a good part where it's like, well, you're being honest and you're engaging and you're finally being willing to, question the things that are lying within you. Now, there are good ways and bad ways to do those things for sure. But how do you feel about sort of the deconstruction stories and when people hear them, and especially from people who are sort of in popular culture, like Rhett and Link was a big one. I know you're a huge fan. How do you feel with that when you're seeing that, and especially working with youth? How do you feel about the whole issues of watching prominent people go to this deconstruction route and leave the church, and like the church's responsibility in, you know, processing those things?
Yeah. That's a big question. And I think that, like, one, I want to start by clarifying, which I don't think I need to clarify. I don't think I said this earlier, but like, or said opposite of this earlier, but like, I think deconstruction to a point is a good thing. And, and I think that, like you talked about, like consumerism in the church or certain traditions that are outside of the Bible, or just, you know, doing things the way that you've always done them, not really knowing why. Like, deconstructing those things, I think is important, because there are a lot of issues with the Western church that should be kind of weeded out, and like, oh, I really shouldn't be doing things quite this way. I think the consumerism, I think the performance-based, the individualistic faith, like all those things need to be re-examined and deconstructed, if you will.
Yeah.
When it comes to like Rhett and Link, for example.
Were you crush?
No, I mean, I know that it's not like they weren't like Christian.
Right, they weren't like evangelizing or something.
Yeah, that would be a different story. But they were just, you know, entertainers that I liked, and I still like them. I don't really follow them anymore, not because of that, just because I'm busy.
No, it's because of that.
Me and my wife still watch like certain old episodes of Good Mythical Morning.
Okay,
so funny.
While we're talking about this,
yes,
your Instagram tag, when I found out that was Rhett and Link, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, this makes so much sense. And then there's so many things, like I was watching The Office over, I don't know, like some other time I'm like, oh, Austinn stole that, and it was not him.
Yeah, that's like most of my humor. It's stolen from either The Office or Rhett and Link. But yeah, my Instagram handle, I think it's not Micah Pufty, which has nothing to do with my name or anything, but it's from an episode of Good Mythical Morning where they were playing Mad Gab, and it's not my cup of tea was the right answer, but Link could not understand, and he kept saying it's not Micah Pufty, and it was just like the funniest 15 minutes of my life. But anyway, love Rhett and Link. But when it comes to their deconstruction, one, it's like, it can be so raw and like heartbreaking, and like to hear people's experiences either in the church or just what they've wrestled with in their personal life, and how their faith has affected that, or how they like have seen abuse in the church, or what it might be. Like that's horrible, and obviously wouldn't, you know, reject any of that. There's a lot of unhealthiness that's in the church. I don't think it's to any fault of the faith or to Jesus. I think it's just humans being their terrible selves, which happens, unfortunately. But so Rhett's deconstruction was very much based on like logical arguments and evidence. Link's was more based on kind of his just personal experiences / just thinking through how the faith affected his relationships and different things like that. And my response to those, I guess, would be one of compassion. Like, obviously, I can relate to what they're saying. They're fellow humans, and they're like, it's interesting to see what they have to say about the faith, and I think there's value in that. So there's definitely a compassion to them, and I would want them to come back to the faith in a way that wouldn't be harmful. Like, obviously, people who have had traumatizing stories with churches or stuff, like, I would want them to find a church that really will love them and represent Christ well, because it's so terrible when people use spiritual authority to abuse people. So obviously there's compassion there. I would want them to come back. in a good way, in a better, healthier way. But then there's part of it that's like when it comes to the logic of it. I think sometimes the questions that they ask or the issues that they take up, like the Bible says this, so like I really don't want to believe that if that's what the Bible really says. Like I think there's a pride in that is unwise. I think.
Are you referring to like the LGBTQ stuff?
That being one of them, yeah. So stuff like that, or even just what the Bible teaches about like miracles or the Exodus. It's like on the fact, like the evidence-based stuff, I think like there's evidence out there and there's, Christian people who are finding that evidence and seeing it and studying it. And I think that the fact that they haven't found that or weren't taught that and they're leaving the church over that is kind of, it's a shame. Like there's resources out there to find answers to those things. I know it can be difficult and there's different biases, but that part of it is why I say like, oh, if we only taught better apologetics in the church, especially to our youth, then you'd have a lot of. I think there's a way to avoid people, especially youth, questioning things, or like their friend asks them a question that's really hard and they can't answer it, so they leave the faith. And it's not that simple usually, but a couple questions, or after a while of having questions that you don't have answers to, you can often be discouraged or give up. And I think that's a shame. I think that there are answers to those questions, and so I think that that I would love to see them, like Rhett and Link, for example, find answers to their questions, because I know that they're out there. When it comes to issues of like, oh, does the Bible really teach that? Then I don't want to be a part of it. Then again, I think that there's a pride there, and it's a like I understand. And when it comes to LGBT issues, it's there's a very human element to that. Yeah. And
well, it's understandable, I think, in a lot of ways. I think that I think a lot of Christians struggle with those things, and like I think that's why you see progressive Christianity growing in a sense, because it's that sort of relief that I don't have to stand for this thing that I don't like and that's not popular and that feels hateful and at times can be very hateful when weaponized against people. But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because there's two sides of it. There's what like the Bible teaches and what we do with that. So if the Bible teaches that a certain practice is inappropriate, or like a certain sexual practice is inappropriate or sinful, the church has to respond in a certain way. They have to know their theology well enough to understand why it's sinful, but not take it too far, not demonize people for having a temptation in that category, or like I was kind of taught, I think I was taught at a young age that even having same-sex attraction was, sinful, I guess. I don't believe that now. I do not think that that's the case. I know plenty of people who have same-sex attraction. I wouldn't say plenty. That's probably an exaggeration. I know several people who have same-sex attraction. And I don't think that there's anything like wrong with that if they, aren't acting out on those inclinations. I do think that homosexual practice is, the Bible would consider that sinful, and I think there's good reasons for that. But approaching that in a way that's loving and because at the end of the day, a person isn't their sexual attractions, it's not their sexual behaviors.
Sure, yeah.
They're a person. They're made in the image of God, and Jesus wants to see them redeemed to God. So, one, making it or not making it like the end all be all of sin or just anything, which I think the church has done a lot, and just demonizing people who struggle with it is terrible. But
and I think for a lot of people, that is a big issue of why they're leaving. They don't want to, be on the the side of hate, because that's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes how it's branded, or, you know,
Right.
they want to support their LGBTQ friends. And there's,
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. I mean, I work in entertainment. There's lots of people who, you know, fit that category, and,
Yeah.
you know, just love them to pieces. I think for
Oh, yeah.
me, the thing is, you know, when it comes to morality, I don't get to make the choice of what's right or wrong, right? And so I have to wrestle with that idea and really work through, well, what really is right and wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of Christians who, you know, find a way to, you know, work that theology into what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to comment on, you know, the process of that or how that is. I just think for myself, I sometimes see a bit of flippancy in the way we come to those decisions. And that's something I don't want to participate in. I'm always open to being wrong about, you know, beliefs or what's orthodox within a faith system. But it is scary to see sometimes, and it's not even in that area. There's plenty of other areas where there's this overconfidence, and it's on both sides of the, you know, the extreme conservative to the more progressive, of extreme confidence of the Bible says this and it's clear. It's like, I don't think you read your Bible very much, because there are things there, like you look at the sex lives of the patriarchs, and you're, you know, you got to wrestle with those things. But also I think the level in which we don't take that process of really trying to understand God and his word seriously. And yeah, it's definitely not a single issue. I think it happens within the church and outside of the church, but it stops us from engaging with people and really starting to engage in these ideas. Okay, well, why do you believe that, and how do we wrestle with those things?
Yeah, and that's kind of like what you talked about with understanding other people's religions, like within Christianity, understanding why people got to where they are with what they believe, whether it's on LGBT issues or anything else, like understanding how they got their theology and why is important. And so, yeah, that's one reason I love, well, I'll mention Mike Winger again, because he can get into the nitty gritty and figure out, he balances what people believe, and he shows why he believes what he believes using the Bible, and like a very thorough defense of it. And I don't agree with him on 100% of everything, but I love his process of, you know, coming to his conclusions using the Bible, and he does a good job of like representing what other people believe and why they believe it. Sometimes, you know, on certain issues, he's like, I'm not sure which one's right, but here are kind of what different people believe. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think something too that I kind of have started to unpack and really think about the way I consume information is to be willing to, you know, watch things with an understanding of like, hey, this is where this person's at, and I don't have to agree with everything, or I can look for it as it is and still learn something from that if I'm intentional about, you know, the way I'm consuming something. And not to say Mike Winger's bad or anything. I've watched a couple of his videos. I don't mind him necessarily. I mean, I think he does something a lot different than what I do. I think for him, he is much more in creating a defense and, you know, sharing that and teaching that with the world. That's not, I don't think I'm qualified for that, first of all.
Oh, yeah.
I think for me, I'm just in a place where like, I want to know stories and I want to use that to help me learn better. How do I embody a faith? Because I think at the end of the day, that's something that I think could change the game in, you know, what it means to be a Christian and how we're doing it. How is people embodying that and showing the things that they believe into their lives and being much more concerned about their own plank than the things out in the world. And I just think that that's something that could be a bit of a game changer. You know, especially you read that verse, I don't even remember where it is, but it's like, it's not like, oh, I'm going to know you by your good theology or, you know, philosophical knowledge about the arguments of God. It's like, oh, they're going to know you by the way you love. And how do we show what love is and embody those things and do that well? It's a tough one. It's the last thing I think we really want to do, of like work to see what it really means to love. I don't know.
Yeah, Because like you said, I mean, theology gets you so far, and then it's on you to take what you believe and put it into practice.
Yeah.
And that's what God calls us to. We're not called to just know Him in an intellectual sense. Like
Right.
we're called to have faith in Him and trust in Him and follow Him. It's very much about the action. It's very much about how we live and how we treat others.
Yeah.
So I think there's, the theology. I think it's important, and it gets you believing things that will help you act it out. But obviously, you can't just have theology and not practice, because then it's wasted.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not anti like good theology.
Oh, yeah.
It should, and I've always said, there's if I can't just believe something I can't intellectually hold on to, or that at least makes sense in my mind.
Right.
Otherwise you're doing yourself a disservice. But there's also acknowledgement of there's something I just don't understand or don't know, or maybe can't understand yet, and that'll take time. But the least I can do is have the trust in the things that I think I know and what I've been given, and participate in that.
Yeah.
In your opinion, do you think the church does a good job at showing people how to participate?
Overall, I would probably say or lean toward no. I don't think it's that, it's not necessarily a yes or no answer. And obviously different local churches are going to be doing things either doing them well or not doing them well.
Yeah. It's not one size fits all. Yeah.
I do think there's so much room to grow in just equipping people and giving them showing them what it is to serve, not just like getting up on a stage in front of them and performing for them and teaching them, and not holding them accountable to actually being part of the body of Christ.
Right.
I think, and that's what a lot of, I think, Christians do, at least that I see, is they go to church on Sunday and they participate in that to a sense, and then they leave, and then they try to be good throughout the week, and then they come back and just go to church, and it's not, the church becomes just a venue, and it doesn't become a community or a body. I think there's definitely room to grow. I think part of the like you talked about, the individualistic side of the Western church is to blame for that, because we are told that we're individuals and we should be individuals, and that's like where we find our worth and our power.
Right. That the community is your family, your individual nuclear family. Go find that there, and then it's,
right. Yeah. And so we lack the just the instinct to be a part of a community and to submit to the people around us, and to offer ourselves to the people around us. So I think there's different factors for it, but I think the church has a lot of room to grow, and I've seen churches do it well and churches do it not well. So
yeah. So we both grew up same church, a lot of the same friends. Some of them have left. Some have, I don't know how many have stayed, at least not in that church. I'm sure some, but some people who left came back, some didn't. What made you stay? Like, what are the things that helped you feel like you could stay within a church?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is just circumstance. I think that that church specifically was where my family decided to go when I was young. It was opening. It was part of another church, kind of a branch off of another church, a second location. It's now become its own church. But out of circumstance, I found myself, with my family at that church, and I started serving. And when I was in high school, I served in various different ways. I served with like third and fourth graders for a couple of years with Hunter, and then when I graduated high school, I served in the middle school group, and now I serve in the high school group. So part of it was just like, and I've been in Arizona, so nothing's taken me away from this area. Yeah. So part of it's just like, this is my community, and I don't have any valid reason for ditching this community to find another one. Like,
Sure.
obviously, this community and this church is not perfect, and but I do think it's doing some things well, and I, that's me too. I'm not perfect, but I think I'm, trying to do things well. So I think it's just kind of where I grew up, and I don't have any reason to leave. I think a big reason why I've stayed is because I do love the people there, and I love the youth group, and it's given me an opportunity to serve. I know some churches are better than others at giving their congregants opportunities to serve. I think there always should be lots of opportunities to serve, and I think I've found that opportunity at my church, and I've loved serving, and I think it's been fruitful. So that's part of why I've stayed for so long. I think it's a solid church, and I appreciate the teaching. So I know a lot of like our friends either went to college somewhere else or just moved away or found different communities. I lived with my parents through college, so and I was serving at the church, so it was like
so you were sheltered.
So I was thankfully I was a little sheltered, but so it's just I never had a reason to leave, and I don't think they're I think barring any big issues with the church, like you shouldn't just leave your church flippantly. It's your community. It should be your community. Well, hopefully if it's a good church, it feels like your community and you have a place there. And if that's the case, which it has been for me, then I really don't have a reason to leave unless I was like taken away from the area or something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's been plenty of people who are in that situation. They stayed in college in state. They lived with their parents, yet they've chose a different path. I mean, is there anything specific with your situation that you'd credit to being the thing that helped? Was it your own choice to just embrace and dig in? Was it people within that community that did challenge you in maybe, and not that church doesn't challenge people. I'm just saying, in a community where maybe that's not as common or acceptable anymore. Like, would you say there's anything that helps you stay with a faith when so many others left?
I think part of it, because there's a difference between like staying with the faith and staying with a specific church.
Yeah.
I stayed with my specific church because, like you said, there were good people who were there and were challenging me, who I knew loved me and who I loved, and so I have a community there.
Yeah.
The opportunity to serve in the youth was always there. So doing that, and I would say part of it's just my personality of I found a home there and I wasn't looking for change, and I'm fairly loyal, so I wanted to stay with this group. And in terms of the faith, I think I don't know, I can't credit it to myself really. I think part of it, obviously it's God working in me, I would say, working in my life, of keeping me close to Him. But just there was a point where it's like, do I, how invested in this should I be? How much of this do I really believe? And that involved, some studying and figuring things out.
Yeah.
The local church was a good resource for that. And as were my parents and other things. So, I, in examining my faith at different points and throughout college specifically, I was only strengthened in it, and I know a lot of people like use the deconstruction term because they're kind of breaking down what they believe. I think there's definitely room for that. Like there are things that I don't believe that I was taught by my parents or by my church early on.
Yeah.
But nothing outside, like non-essentials. I would say I still believe the core and the gospel. But I would call it more of a construction than anything. It was like I wasn't there wasn't or even there wasn't too much to weed out.
Right, like
it
you
was
just
more,
you hadn't even tackled it.
It was more like I didn't have enough there, so I needed to start building it up.
And add on to the house.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'd had kind of a very surface level belief system, and I had to, get more into it and figure things out and figure out the why.
I mean, being in a church is hard. And I think for me, I was in church when I was in Phoenix, and that was my life. And then when I moved to the Bay Area and I went and lived other places, there was a purposeful choice to not continue going to church every Sunday, not because I didn't believe, because it was like, well, what does it mean to be the church outside of a building? And I'm glad I did that. I think eventually through that process, it gave me the understanding of why I needed a church. But even going back in after sort of being outside, I always say it's like I went through the looking glass in like Alice in Wonderland. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, I know all these things and I know what people are saying, but it just feels so different. And there was something that just never settled right. And, I had to struggle that for a long time. And I mean, I did that all the way up until I found Orthodoxy. And I think I still struggle with what that means, especially because of how traditional it is and how high church it is. Mm-hmm. It's very different from what I grew up with, where we had church in a warehouse and your youth pastor wears flip-flops. You're just like, okay, reorienting myself. But, I had to fight with myself, not only that sort of casualness of church, but also just the modernity that was built into the faith that I knew, and having to embrace mystery more and the real understanding of what that means. Man, it's a trip. But yeah, I think there's something so interesting about people who are willing to ask questions and come to new understandings of their same faith, but still be able to stick with it. Like, why? What are those things? It's interesting. Yeah. But yeah, we're running close to time, but I want to ask one more question. Mm-hmm. So you're about to be a dad.
Yes.
How do you want to approach sort of this view of church and what it means to be a Christian and the embodiment of that for your daughter, and sort of show her the truth of what you think you found?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that my approach is going to be kind of teaching my daughter what Jesus teaches and what the Bible says. I think that's the key. I think trying to weed out anything that's outside of the Bible or traditions that are really kind of worthless, or any biases that I might have that I need to get rid of, or biases that found their way into what I was taught, either from people around me or from the church. Getting rid of those things and just teaching the Bible. Mm-hmm. And I think that's it's simple. It can be hard to do. Obviously, you need to have an understanding of the Bible to be able to teach it, and I'm working on that. And so, I think my approach is going to be show my daughter why I believe what I believe, and be able to back it up with the Bible and with Jesus, and focusing on the essentials, which is Jesus, that he is God, and he came to die for our sins and to redeem us to God. So I think focusing on that and teaching the Bible for what it is, and not shying away from things, and being open to, like, obviously as she grows, she's going to have questions, and me, one, being able to say, I don't know if I don't know, and two, and when I don't, like, figuring it out so we can both learn, and just being open to her questions, and just walking through things with her, but all coming back to Jesus and what the Bible teaches.
Do you think you'd ever introduce like atheism or some of these other worldviews that are gaining popularity?
No, because I don't think that there's fruitfulness in them. I wouldn't introduce them as like an option, because I believe that they're false. Mm-hmm. I would introduce them in a way that would be like, well, here's what other people believe, and what you might encounter, and mm-hmm. why, and how you can react lovingly, and for the sake of understanding, I think there's definitely a level of knowing other belief systems that's good. I wouldn't introduce it as like an option to her, but yeah.
Okay. Well, any other questions for me or last thoughts before we wrap up?
I don't think so. But
Okay. Well,
yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
yeah,
and,
thanks for
talking to
being
me.
on. It was a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. And like always, I will close with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.